Gary, Indiana, August 27, 1963. The Roosevelt High School auditorium buzzed with the particular energy of a community talent show, a mixture of nervous anticipation, parental pride, and the distinct aroma of floor wax and aging velvet curtains. The annual Gary's Rising Stars competition had become something of a tradition in this steel town, where opportunities for artistic expression were as precious as they were rare. Factory whistles and shift changes typically defined the rhythm of life in Gary, but for one evening each summer, the city's children were given a platform to showcase talents that had nothing to do with industrial prowess. Backstage, in the cramped hallway that served as a waiting area, performers of various ages made last-minute adjustments to costumes, practiced dance steps, or quietly hummed melodies. Among them stood the Jackson brothers, Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, and little Michael, their matching homemade outfits setting them apart even in this colorful gathering. At 9, 10, and 11 years old, the three older brothers projected a surprising poise, the result of countless hours of rehearsal under their father Joseph's strict direction. But 5-year-old Michael, the youngest by far of all the performers that evening, seemed to physically shrink beneath the fluorescent hallway lights, his small body pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear into it. "I don't want to," he whispered, eyes fixed on the floor, his voice so soft that only his mother Katherine, kneeling beside him, could hear. "I am scared." Katherine Jackson smoothed the collar of his small suit jacket, handmade by her own careful stitching, and spoke with gentle firmness. "Remember what we practiced at home," she said. "Just close your eyes if you need to. Pretend you're singing just for me, like in the living room." Michael looked up at his mother, his large, expressive eyes filled with the particular terror that only the prospect of public performance can instill in a child. This wasn't simply stage fright. This was a deep, almost existential dread that seemed at odds with the tiny frame it inhabited. Joseph Jackson, standing a few feet away in conversation with the show's organizer, glanced over at his wife and youngest son. His face betrayed no sympathy for Michael's distress, only a stern expectation that the boy would overcome it. After months of rigorous training in their small Gary home, evenings and weekends filled with vocal drills, choreography practice, and Joseph's unflinching criticism, the Jackson brothers were finally ready for their first significant public performance. Or at least, the older three were ready. Little Michael, despite possessing a voice and performance instinct that had astonished even his demanding father, seemed on the verge of complete emotional collapse. The Reynolds sisters, "You're on in 2 minutes," called the student volunteer managing the backstage area, clipboard in hand. "Jackson brothers, you'll be after them." Katherine gave Michael's shoulders a gentle squeeze. "You'll be wonderful," she whispered. "God gave you a special gift, Michael. Don't be afraid to share it." Michael nodded almost imperceptibly, but his eyes remained wide with fear, his small body tense with the effort of containing his anxiety. His brothers, attuned to their youngest member's distress, formed a protective circle around him. Jackie, the oldest at 11, placed a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. "Just watch me if you get scared," he said. "Remember, we're right there with you. And remember what Dad said," Tito added, glancing toward their father, who was now standing with arms crossed, watching his sons with an expression of measured expectation. "Once the music starts, the fear goes away." This was one of Joseph's most frequently repeated maxims during their grueling rehearsals. Fear and music cannot coexist in the same moment. When you truly give yourself to the music, he insisted, there is no room left for fear. Michael had nodded dutifully each time his father said this, but the concept remained abstract to his 5-year-old mind, a promise without evidence, especially now as fear consumed every inch of his small being. On stage, the Reynolds sisters, 3 girls from the local junior high, were finishing their interpretation of the Supremes' "Where Did Our Love Go?", complete with synchronized choreography that earned enthusiastic applause from the packed auditorium. As they took their final bow, the student MC bounded onto the stage with microphone in hand. "Let's hear it again for the Reynolds sisters," he exclaimed, leading another round of applause. And now, making their competition debut, Please welcome the Jackson brothers. Backstage, Michael froze completely, his feet suddenly seeming fused to the floor. Joseph stepped forward, his expression brooking no resistance, and gave his youngest son a firm but controlled nudge toward the stage entrance. "Go," he said simply, the single word containing volumes of expectation, instruction, and consequence. The three older brothers moved confidently toward the stage, but Michael remained rooted, his breathing shallow, eyes darting in panic toward his mother. Katherine nodded encouragingly, mouthing, "You can do it," as she made a gentle, shooing motion with her hands. With visible reluctance, Michael took one small step, then another, following his brothers like a tiny satellite caught in their gravitational pull. The audience's first glimpse of the Jackson brothers produced an audible ripple of reaction, partly appreciative murmurs at the sight of the matching outfits, partly in awe of recognition at the stark age difference between the three older boys and their tiny brother. Michael's fear was so palpable that even from the back row of the auditorium, it was clear this was a child on the verge of either flight or tears. He stood slightly behind his brothers, almost hidden, his small shoulders hunched, eyes downcast. The four judges, the high school music teacher, the choir director from the First Baptist Church, a local radio DJ, and the owner of Gary's only record shop, exchanged glances that mixed curiosity with concern. The radio DJ leaned over to whisper something to the music teacher, who shook her head slightly, her expression one of gentle skepticism about what they were about to witness. The backing track began, a somewhat scratchy recording of Smokey Robinson's Who's Loving You played through the school's modest sound system. Jackie, Tito, and Jermaine began their choreographed movements with surprising precision for their age, the hours of relentless practice evident in every synchronized step. Michael remained frozen, barely visible behind his brothers, his lips pressed together in a tight line of concentrated terror. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the collective discomfort of watching a child in distress creating a palpable tension in the room. Then came the moment for the first verse, the moment that, according to Joseph's meticulous arrangement, belonged to Michael. His brothers stepped aside in perfect unison, creating a clear path to center stage. But Michael didn't move. He stood, wide-eyed with panic, staring out at the sea of unfamiliar faces. In the wings, Joseph's expression darkened dangerously. Katherine clasped her hands together as if in prayer. For 3 excruciating seconds that felt like an eternity to everyone in the auditorium, it seemed the performance had derailed before it had truly begun. The backing track continued its relentless forward momentum, the vocal entry point now passed, the musical gap where Michael's voice should have been hanging awkwardly in the air. Then, something remarkable happened. Jermaine, showing presence of mind well beyond his 10 years, smoothly stepped into the void, taking up the verse that should have been Michael's. As he did, Jackie gently placed a hand on Michael's back, subtly guiding him forward until he stood fully visible at center stage. The spotlight, operated by a student technician who had been instructed to follow the lead singer, swung clumsily to find Michael's small form. And in that moment, as the harsh light illuminated him fully, something within Michael Jackson transformed. It wasn't a gradual change, but an almost instant metamorphosis, as if the boy who had stood terrified backstage moments ago had been replaced by an entirely different being. His hunched shoulders straightened, his downcast eyes lifted. His expression, previously pinched with fear, opened into something approaching wonder. Jermaine, seeing this transformation, smoothly directed the song back to his youngest brother just as the chorus approached. What happened next would be described for years afterward by those who witnessed it as nothing short of miraculous. Michael's voice, when it finally emerged, bore no trace of the paralyzing fear that had gripped him seconds earlier. Clear, powerful, and imbued with an emotional depth that seemed impossible from a 5-year-old, it filled the auditorium with a sound so unexpected that several audience members physically started in their seats. "When I had you to myself," he sang, the familiar Smokey Robinson lyrics transformed his young voice into something both innocent and somehow ancient, I didn't want you around." The judge's reactions were immediate and unguarded. The record shop owner sat forward abruptly, papers falling unheeded from his lap. The music teacher's hand flew to her mouth in an unconscious gesture of astonishment. The radio DJ's professional composure cracked into an expression of undisguised wonder. The choir director simply closed her eyes, as if better to absorb the sound without visual distraction. But the transformation in Michael's voice was only the beginning. As he continued to sing, his entire body became an instrument of expression. The fearful, frozen child who had barely been able to step onto the stage was gone, replaced by a performer of such natural grace and intuitive understanding of movement that it defied rational explanation. His hands punctuated phrases with gestures that professional adult performers might have studied and envied. His small body swayed and turned in perfect rhythm with the music. Most remarkably, his face, previously a mask of terror, now flowed through expressions that perfectly matched the emotional content of each lyric. Longing, regret, tenderness, passion, all rendered with a sincerity and depth that seemed to channel experiences far beyond his 5 years of life. By the first chorus, the audience's initial discomfort had transformed into rapt attention. Parents who had been casually watching now sat forward in their seats. Children who had been fidgeting were still, their attention captured completely by the phenomenon unfolding before them. The initial sympathetic "ah" that had greeted Michael's frightened appearance was replaced by murmurs of astonishment and a leaning forward posture of people witnessing something they know they will remember for the rest of their lives. On stage, Michael's brothers performed their backing vocals and choreography with energy and precision, but they might as well have been invisible. Every eye in the room was fixed on the small figure commanding center stage. No longer a frightened child, but a vessel for something that transcended age, experience, even understanding. As the song progressed, Michael's confidence visibly grew. His movements became more expansive, his gestures more emphatic. The voice that emerged from his small frame continued to astonish with its power, control, and emotional authenticity. There was a moment, during a particularly soulful passage, when he executed a perfectly timed spin that would have impressed a professional dancer 3 times his age, a move that drew audible gasps from the audience. In the front row, the record shop owner, a man who prided himself on his stoic professionalism and discerning taste, wiped surreptitiously at his eyes. The song built toward its emotional peak, and Michael's performance intensified with it. His voice soared through the final chorus with a power that belied his tiny stature. And then, for the final sustained note, a challenging, soul-influenced melisma that would have tested singers with years of training. Michael closed his eyes, threw his head back slightly, and delivered it with flawless control and pitch, holding the note several beats longer than the original recording. The note hung in the air for what seemed an impossibly long time. And when it finally faded, there was a moment of complete, stunned silence in the auditorium. It lasted perhaps 3 full seconds, 3 seconds in which no one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. And then, like a wave crashing against a shore, the applause erupted. It wasn't the polite, encouraging applause that had followed other children's performances. This was a spontaneous explosion of genuine amazement. The sound of an audience that has witnessed something so far beyond their expectations that they can respond in no other way. In the front row, all 4 judges were on their feet before they seemed consciously aware of standing. The first to rise in what quickly became a standing ovation that encompassed the entire auditorium. The music teacher was openly weeping. The radio DJ was shaking his head in disbelief even as he applauded. The choir director had her hands clasped as if in prayer, her face lifted in an expression of almost religious transcendence. And the record shop owner, the most cynical of the 4, a man who had seen talent come and go through Gary for decades, was applauding with such vigor that his program had fallen, forgotten, to the floor. On stage, Michael's brothers grinned with evident pride, their own considerable talents momentarily overshadowed by the supernova in their midst. And Michael himself, as the applause washed over him in waves, underwent another transformation from the confident, almost otherworldly performer back to a 5-year-old boy, suddenly shy in the face of such overwhelming response. He ducked his head, a small, uncertain smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he looked to his brothers for reassurance. In the wings, Katherine Jackson wept openly, her hands still clasped in that prayerful gesture, now raised slightly in thanksgiving. Beside her, Joseph stood perfectly still, his typically stern expression softened by something that, on any other face, might have been identified as wonder. As the applause continued unabated, the student MC approached the stage, clearly uncertain how to proceed in the face of such an extraordinary reaction. The talent show had a schedule to maintain, but interrupting this moment felt almost sacrilegious. Eventually, as the applause finally began to subside, he stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice reflecting the same amazement visible on every face in the auditorium, "the Jackson brothers." This announcement triggered another wave of applause, during which the 4 brothers lined up at the front of the stage and took a synchronized bow, a polished, professional gesture that seemed to underscore the seriousness with which they approached their craft, even at such young ages. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more moments that define the king of pop's extraordinary journey. As they exited the stage, Michael, now fully returned to his shy, quiet self, was swept up in a gentle hug by his mother. "I told you," Katherine whispered, holding him close. "I told you that God gave you a special gift." Michael nodded against her shoulder, his small body finally relaxing from the tension that had gripped it before the performance. Joseph approached, his expression a complex mixture of pride, vindication, and perhaps a touch of newfound respect. He placed a hand briefly on Michael's shoulder, a rare gesture of approval from the stern patriarch, before turning to address all 4 of his sons. "That," he said simply, "is what happens when you prepare properly." It was as close to effusive praise as Joseph Jackson ever came, but in that moment, it was enough. The remainder of the talent show proceeded according to schedule, but there was a palpable sense that the emotional peak of the evening had already been reached. The subsequent performers, many of them talented in their own right, found themselves playing to an audience still processing what they had witnessed earlier. A 5-year-old boy who had barely been able to step onto the stage, transformed before their eyes into something transcendent. The judges' deliberation was the shortest in the history of the Gary's Rising Stars competition. There was no discussion, no weighing of different performances against each other. The decision was unanimous and immediate. When the participants were called back to the stage for the announcement of the winners, the Jackson brothers stood in the same formation as before, with little Michael slightly behind his older siblings, his earlier confidence once again replaced by the natural shyness of a 5-year-old thrust into the spotlight. "The winner of this year's Gary's Rising Stars competition," announced the music teacher, her voice still thick with emotion, "is the Jackson brothers." The applause that followed was enthusiastic but not surprising. What was surprising, however, was what happened next. The record shop owner stepped forward, taking the microphone from his fellow judge. For a moment, he simply looked at Michael, his expression one of a man still trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. "Young man," he said finally, addressing Michael directly, "I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen talent come and I've seen talent go. But what you have—" He paused, clearly struggling to find adequate words. "What you have isn't just talent. It's something else entirely, something I don't think any of us have quite the words to describe." He turned to address the audience. "We all witnessed something extraordinary tonight. Remember this moment. Remember what it felt like to be in this room, because someday you're going to tell people that you were here in this auditorium in Gary, Indiana, the night you first heard Michael Jackson sing." In the years that followed, as the Jackson 5 rose to national and then international fame, many of those present that night would indeed tell that story, would describe how they had witnessed a frightened 5-year-old transform before their eyes into a performer of such extraordinary ability that it challenged their very understanding of what was possible. The record shop owner, who would later become an early champion of the group and help arrange their audition with Motown Records, would often reflect on that pivotal night. Some talents you discover, he would say. Others announce themselves so powerfully that all you can do is stand back and wonder at them. Michael was the latter, a force of nature disguised as a small, shy boy from Gary. For Michael himself, that night would mark the beginning of a complex relationship with performance, a lifelong pattern of almost paralyzing pre-show anxiety followed by transformative on-stage confidence. Throughout his career, those closest to him would witness this same dichotomy. The painfully shy, soft-spoken man who, upon stepping into the spotlight, became something else entirely, a performer of such power and presence that he seemed to transcend the very limitations of the human form. Years later, long after the moonwalk and Thriller and all the unprecedented achievements that would define his adult career, Michael was asked in an interview about the origins of his stage persona, about how he had developed the ability to transform so completely when performing. He was quiet for a moment, uncharacteristically reflective, before responding. "I think it was always there," he said softly. "Even that first night in Gary, when I was so scared I could barely walk onto the stage. There was this moment when the fear just disappeared, and suddenly there was only the music, only the feeling, only the connection with the audience." He smiled slightly, his eyes distant with memory. "My father always told us that fear and music couldn't exist in the same moment. That night in Gary was when I first understood what he meant. It was, perhaps, the perfect distillation of Michael Jackson's unique genius. The ability to transform fear into its opposite, to channel the very energy of his anxiety into performances of such transcendent power that they left audiences forever changed. And it all began on that August night in 1963, when a terrified 5-year-old boy who could barely step onto the stage found the courage to share his extraordinary gift with the world for the very first time. If you've been moved by this glimpse into the earliest days of Michael Jackson's extraordinary journey, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we keep alive the memory of not just what Michael Jackson became, but what he always was, a singular talent whose gift transcended age, era, and even understanding. In a small, carefully preserved scrapbook in the Jackson family archives, there is a yellowed newspaper clipping from the Gary Post-Tribune, dated August 29, 1963, 2 days after that fateful talent show. The headline reads simply, "Local Brothers Win Talent Competition, Youngest Steals Show." Beneath, it is a grainy photograph showing 4 small boys in matching outfits, the tiniest of them partly hidden behind his brothers, a shy smile just visible on his face. The brief article mentions the remarkable vocal abilities of 5-year-old Michael, describing him as a performer of unusual maturity and natural talent. It is a modest record of what would later be recognized as a pivotal moment in music history, the first public glimpse of a gift that would eventually reshape the landscape of popular culture and touch millions of lives across the globe. Those present in the Roosevelt High School auditorium that night could not have known the full magnitude of what they were witnessing, could not have foreseen the global phenomenon that shy 5-year-old would become. But they knew they had experienced something extraordinary, a moment when a child too frightened to step onto the stage had transformed before their eyes into an artist of transcendent ability, and in doing so, had taken his first steps on a journey that would lead him to become the king of pop.